a sweet redemption. I will never let you down. Will it ever get sunny? Oh, I wonder, honey, baby, how you make me sway. You say you will. I'm calling your addicting brain. You say you will, yeah. I'm causing the obsessive mind. You say you will. I'm calling your addicting brain. You say you will, yeah. I'm causing the obsessive mind. Saw you rolling steady, took it kinda heavy. Baby, I'm a loving kind. Jaded loving hazard doesn't really matter. Baby, say you will be mine. Take my affection and my safe protection. I will always be around.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 7 of Trucksafe Live, the show where we and our guest tackle the hot button issues impacting highway transportation. I'm Brandon, this is Jerad. We are with Trucksafe Consulting and Childress Law, both of which are dedicated to helping motor carriers develop and maintain cutting-edge safety programs. So happy New Year to everyone. This is our first Trucksafe Live of 2022, so welcome back. If you've joined us before, this is your first show, then welcome. If you are here with us live, be sure to say hello in the comments below so that we know you're here. And then obviously as we go along, if you have any questions or thoughts on any of the topics we're discussing, just drop them in the comments. We'll try and get them up on screen. So Jerad, you ready to roll with a new season of Trucksafe Live?
I am indeed, and welcome everyone. It's been an interesting last couple of weeks. We had a couple of things, a couple of developments in the transportation world, particularly the vaccine mandate was halted by the U.S. Supreme Court. That was a majority decision, and essentially the U.S. Supreme Court stated that OSHA had overstepped its bounds in trying to regulate public health as opposed to workplace health. And so for various reasons, it was remanded back to the circuit court. So we may not have heard the last of it, but essentially that vaccine mandate has been addressed by the U.S. Supreme Court. So kind of good news there.
Yeah, to the applause of many in the trucking industry. As we see here on the screen, ATA released its statement. It fought hard to get that overturned. They were one of the few, I think, that got to argue before the Supreme Court. So, yeah, I mean, good news for the industry in that regard, but we'll see where it goes after that.
Yeah, and some bad news. Meera Joshi has announced that she's not going to be the head of the FMCSA at this point. Her nomination kind of got stalled. Her Senate confirmation got a little bit stalled, and it was recently announced that she's leaving for New York City for a deputy mayor position. But good news, silver lining, we do have a new administrator named.
Yeah, just last night, Secretary Pete Buttigieg announced Robin Hutchinson as the next deputy administrator of the FMCSA. Her background prior to this announcement, she was the deputy assistant secretary for safety policy for the U.S. DOT. She had worked a lot on the infrastructure bill that was just recently passed. Before that, she was director of public works for the city of Minneapolis, and then before that, she was transportation director for Salt Lake City, Utah. So
look at all that! Look at all that transportation experience.
Yeah, good transportation experience. It'll be interesting to see where she takes the agency, presumably installed in that position because of her infrastructure type background. So we'll see where that takes us. And then another big thing in the news recently, before we get into the main topic of today's show, was the FMCSA's announcement a couple of weeks ago now of the Safe Driver Apprenticeship Pilot Program, which is a new pilot program that they are getting ready to roll out at the direction of Congress. Congress told them to do this, and they are taking efforts to roll it out here. We'll probably end up doing a show that's specific to the pilot program, I suspect. But generally speaking, if you want more information about it, we've got a detailed article on our website. But generally, it's going to be a pilot program that's going to allow 18 to 21-year-olds to operate commercial motor vehicles in interstate commerce. Currently, rules require you to be 21 years old to operate in interstate commerce, but several states have for years allowed 18-year-old drivers to operate exclusively in intrastate commerce. So the FMCSA and Congress saw fit to at least study the impact of allowing those drivers to operate in interstate commerce. And so we'll see how it goes. The pilot program is going to be pretty limited to start out with 3,000 participating drivers, approximately 1,000 participating carriers. There's going to be an application process, etc. One thing that we did want to mention, and this is on our website as well. When we heard FMCSA make this announcement, we got to work on developing a compliance package for motor carriers that are interested in potentially rolling out one of these programs and getting approval from FMCSA to participate. We think that we're concerned that a bunch of carriers are going to rush into this without putting parameters around that program and the policies that we think need to be in effect in order to make that program defensible if, God forbid, one of those apprentices gets involved in a catastrophic accident. So we spent a lot of time developing a compliance package that includes a bunch of different documents that we think would help motor carriers who want to be involved not only meet their regulatory requirements. There are going to be certain reporting requirements that they have to meet to participate, but also to help them mitigate their exposure.
Yeah, and then having conversations with some clients that we work with that have the ability to use these under 21 drivers in intrastate commerce already. A lot of them just forego that sector of drivers just simply because they're concerned about what insurance is going to do about that. I mean, that'll be something that's really interesting with this program rolling out is, you know, the program itself details requirements for the trucks and technology, meaning it's going to make these drivers safer. So it'll be interesting to see how insurance responds to the program.
Yeah, I haven't heard of any insurers speak out on the issue. I will be interested to hear how that's going to work and if they're going to be open to it for their insured. So we'll just have to wait and see. So with all that said, if you're interested in that compliance package, check it out on our website, trucksafeconsulting.com. If you have any questions, feel free to give us a call and we'll kind of walk you through it. If you need any help tailoring it to your operations, we can do that as well. So that kind of wraps up the other topics that we wanted to discuss before we get into the main topic, which is the entry-level driver training. And one last thing before we do that, Jerad, you want to talk about the sponsor for this episode?
Let's take a minute and thank the sponsor of today's show, which is Lynx by Rand Transportation. Lynx is a full-featured transportation management system developed specifically for small to mid-sized trucking companies, freight brokers, and commercial shippers alike. Its mobile-first design is the only TMS that offers all the tools needed without leaving the application to schedule, dispatch, and track freight from order entry to driver workflow and billing using any device. Online or on the go, Lynx is an affordable TMS that provides the functionality owner-operators and small fleet managers and 3PL companies need to improve efficiency, reduce costs, and improve profitability. So if you're looking for information on this, you can email info@lynx2go.com or go to their website to schedule a free demo.
All right. Yeah. Thanks for Lynx for sponsoring this particular episode. So jumping right in, the entry-level driver training, this is the hot topic right now because we are coming up on the compliance deadline for the entry-level driver training rule, which is going to be February 7th. So under a month now before that rule takes effect. And true to form with any big rule making, all of the questions are seeming to come out here with at the 11th hour. So we've had a lot of calls from our clients asking about how the program is going to work, who it applies to, that type of thing. So we wanted to spend some time just answering the most frequently asked questions that we're getting about the program. Some of the more sticky issues, the gray areas, we wanted to get into some of those. So we've got probably a handful or so questions that we're getting pretty commonly. So we're going to answer those. Before we do, let's just kind of recap what the rule is. Starting out, this rule has been a long time in the making. So Congress originally told FMCSA that they needed to implement a rule like this back in their MAP 21 legislation, which I think was passed in 2016. And Congress explained in the legislation that they wanted FMCSA to look at a better, a more uniform way to train drivers who are seeking to obtain their commercial driver's license. And so we'll get into a little bit later kind of the rationale behind the rule. But long story short, this was a long time in the making, going back to 2016. It was originally set to take effect in 2020, but there were delays because FMCSA had some technical issues with getting the system rolled out. Because it's going to involve and require some interaction between the various state licensing agencies and training providers and students. So there's a lot of people involved in the process, and it's just it's been a nightmare from what I can tell, getting the IT system set up for that.
Yeah, I don't know about you, Brandon, but I feel like I've been talking about ELDT for a very long time. Every time I give a regulatory update presentation, ELDT has
Yeah.
come up for years and years. So I'm excited for this February 7th compliance date.
Yeah, I wish they would have picked a different name because it's so close to ELDs, another topic that we're dealing with on a day-to-day basis, and we're always getting them confused. Are you talking about electronic logging devices, or are you talking about the new training requirements? So, but yeah, ELDT, entry-level driver training, is what we're talking about today. So, February 7th is the date you need to know. As of that date, drivers who are seeking to complete certain CDL transactions are going to have to obtain entry-level driver training from a registered training provider before they're going to be eligible to complete their CDL transaction. So we'll talk about later when we start answering questions about who specifically needs to obtain the entry-level driver training. But that's kind of the overview of what the regulation is going to require.
And really, the nice thing about ELDT for motor carriers is it kind of shifts the burden from the carriers to the drivers to make sure that this training is completed. Because before they can sit for that CDL exam, they have to have that certificate to the state driver's licensing agency before they can sit for that exam.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I won't say any. So currently, I will remind carriers, because when we do mock audits, we find that a lot of carriers aren't even doing this currently when they should be. But currently, the rules are set up. There is an entry-level driver training requirement in the existing regulations that places the onus on motor carriers to provide entry-level driver training to certain drivers, specifically drivers who have CDL drivers who have less than a year's worth of experience operating commercial motor vehicles. Those drivers, if you're a carrier currently, you would have to provide them as their carrier. You would have to provide them training in 4 particular areas: driver qualification, hours of service, driver wellness, and whistleblower protections. And then you have to document that training in their driver qualification file. So as Jerad said, the good thing about this new rule for carriers, if you're a motor carrier, is that this new rule is essentially shifting that burden off of you and onto the drivers themselves. So you, as the motor carrier, will no longer have an obligation to provide that training to any entry-level drivers that you onboard. They will have the burden to obtain the training on their own in order to even be eligible to take the skills test or the knowledge test in certain circumstances.
And really, I mean, this is going to create new drivers that are better prepared to start at a fleet. So I mean, it's definitely a good thing all around. Drivers obviously hate it because it's just another hoop they have to jump through to get their CDL. But it's going to create safer drivers that show up to motor carriers to be hired.
Yeah, and like Congress said, they wanted something that was a more uniform way to onboard or to train entry-level drivers. The current system, how it is currently, you could obtain training from a CDL school. There are certainly a number of good CDL schools out there that prepare drivers with the information they need to get a CDL. But you don't have to go to those schools. You could just learn from your brother how to operate a truck, and then you can go take the test. And as long as you pass the test, you've got a CDL. So that's the system currently. The new system will ensure kind of a more uniform way of training these drivers to make sure they've got a universal understanding of all the information that the FMCSA has deemed appropriate for those types of drivers. So, as we said at the start, I mean, there has been a lot of questions about the entry level driver training rule and some confusion with certain aspects of it. So, that's what we're going to hit on here. So, let's just get right into it here. First question we get a lot of is why? Why are we even doing this? And we kind of hit on this already. Congress told FMCSA that it has to do this, and FMCSA is now getting around to actually doing it. So this is at the direction of Congress pursuant to the MAP 21 legislation. So that's why we are in the position that we're in. Next up, who must comply? So Jerad, you want to run through these?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, anyone that's seeking a CDL to get their Class A for the first time or B for the first time has to comply with these requirements, which will kind of give you a little bit more detail about what that entails. Or if you're upgrading from a Class B to a Class A CDL, you'll have to comply with these ELDT requirements. And also those seeking certain endorsements like passenger, school bus, or hazmat also have to comply.
Yeah, so one of the big questions is, okay, if I already hold a Class A or Class B CDL, or if I already hold a hazmat passenger or school bus endorsement prior to February 7th, 2022, am I going to have to do anything? And the answer is no. It's going to be anyone who is seeking to complete those CDL transactions on February 7th or thereafter.
And importantly, also, if you have a CLP, you're not going to have to comply with this as long as you seek the CDL before that expires.
Yeah. So, yeah, if you've got your CLP currently and you don't need to renew the CLP after February 7th, 2022, then you're not going to have to take the entry level driver training to get your CDL. Next up, what does the entry level driver training entail exactly? Well, that kind of depends on which way you're going with this. What type of CDL transaction are you looking to complete? Are you looking to get a Class A CDL? Are you looking to get a Class B CDL? Are you looking to upgrade B to A? Or are you looking to get a hazmat passenger or school bus endorsement? The training is going to differ for all of those different paths. But generally speaking, with the exception of a hazmat endorsement specifically, which we'll get to in a minute, all of the other training requirements are going to involve a theory component and a behind the wheel component. There's going to be a classroom portion that the student has to take, and then there's going to be a behind the wheel component of the training that they have to take. And they'll have to pass both of those to the satisfaction of their training provider or providers. We'll talk about that in a second, in order to then be able to go to their DMV and take the skills or knowledge tests that they need to complete those transactions.
And the training itself has to be provided by a registered training provider following the curriculum that's set by the FMCSA. And so if you go to if you Googled FMCSA training provider registry, you'll be able to see the list of those that are actually already registered as training providers. It's a massive list. You'll also see how they offer that training. You'll see if they're offering that training online or in person. So check that out if you're interested.
Yeah, and I mentioned hazmat, how that was going to be a little bit different from the other paths, and that's because to get a hazmat endorsement, assuming you already have a CDL, if you're just seeking to add a hazmat endorsement, that doesn't involve a skills test. It only involves a knowledge test. And with that in mind, those that already have a CDL that just want to add a hazmat endorsement after February 7th will only have to take a theory-based training in order to then be eligible to go take the knowledge test to get their hazmat endorsement. But just keep in mind, for everybody else that we mentioned earlier, they're going to have to generally get pass a theory component of the training and then a behind the wheel training component. And those can happen in any order. So you don't have to take the theory training first, and then the behind the wheel training. Although that would make sense to me to do it in that order. You could take the behind the wheel training first. You could, and then take the theory training from that same training provider or a completely different training provider.
And what if there's a 6 month gap in between taking theory and taking behind the wheel? Does
Yeah.
that matter?
No, it doesn't matter. At least what FMCSA has advised currently. So, yeah, that's something to keep in mind. Now, with the theory component of the training, I will note that in order to pass that particular training, there's going to have to be the training provider is going to have to administer a test after the training is complete, and the student is going to have to pass that test with a score of at least 80% in order to complete the theory-based training. On the behind the wheel side of things, there's no specific assessment that has to be done. The behind the wheel training just has to be completed to the satisfaction of whoever it is that's providing that training.
Next question. How long will the training last? Is there a requirement on how long the theory-based training has to be?
Yeah, so the rule doesn't set any minimum hours. So this is an interesting question that we get a lot. FMCSA originally, when they were proposing the rule, they had toyed with the idea of setting minimum hours requirements for the theory and the behind the wheel training, but then based on the comments that they received during the rulemaking process, they elected to go with no specific hours requirement for either portion of the training. So it's going to ultimately be up to each individual training provider how long their particular training is going to last. Now, there is one caveat to this.
Big caveat.
Yeah, a big caveat to this, which is that individual states can impose their own requirements when it comes to entry-level driver training. So there are some states out there right now that set minimum training requirements for drivers who are domiciled in those states and who are going to be licensed through their state. And the FMCSA has said that the FMCSA's entry-level driver training rule does not completely preempt those state laws. So the states are still going to be able to enforce more stringent entry-level driver training requirements if they want to. So the caveat there is that you need to check with your individual state to see if they have more onerous requirements, because some of them may say we have a minimum hours requirement for theory-based training. And so if you as a driver are going to get online theory-based training, you need to make sure that the training that you get from your online provider meets your state standards if they have an hours rule, for example. So that's an important thing to keep in mind.
And if you're a motor carrier and, after February 7th, if you're not providing any kind of theory-based training or anything like that, all you care about is the driver coming to you with a valid CDL at that point.
Yeah.
So you don't have to be too concerned about that.
I mean, I think that's one of the biggest questions we get, motor carriers calling us and saying, all right, what do we need to know about the entry-level driver training rule? And my answer is, if you're not planning on providing the training to your drivers, you don't need to know anything about the rule, because you're not going to have any obligations under the rule. In fact, the obligations that you have currently are going to be relaxed some, because you're not going to have the obligation to provide that entry-level driver, that old version of entry-level driver training anymore. So if what you do as a motor carrier is hire drivers who already have a CDL, if that's your policy, then you're not going to have to worry about these requirements at all, because those drivers will already have taken the entry-level driver training in order to get their CDL, and then they're going to come to you with a CDL. So that should be the end of the story.
And tons of motor carriers that we work with are the types of motor carriers that are either affiliated with trucking schools or have their own internal trucking school that feeds drivers into their fleet. I mean, if you're one of those motor carriers, then absolutely you need to be very concerned about this and get a handle on the theory and maybe the behind the wheel as well.
Yeah, that's right. If you are going to be providing the training, then these requirements that we're going to talk about here shortly are ones that you need to pay attention to.
But good news, if you are a motor carrier that runs a trucking school or is affiliated with a trucking school, the theory-based training can actually be very easy, which kind of leads into the next question, which is, can training be online? Absolutely. The theory-based component can be online. Of course, you can't do the behind-the-wheel component online. It's important to note that you still must be a registered training provider if this theory-based training is being given online or in person. So make sure whatever you're developing, you have an approved individual, qualified individual giving the course. Again, as I mentioned, if you search on the training provider registry, you can see tons of different training providers that have already registered. And you can, like I said, also see if they're offering it online or in person.
Yeah, so if as we mentioned earlier, if you're a motor carrier that has an interest in providing the training to your employees, let's say you're a mixed fleet, you've got some CDL drivers, you got some non-CDL drivers, and you have an interest in offering a program to them that will allow your non-CDL drivers to upgrade and get their CDL, and you kind of want to facilitate that process, there's several different ways you can handle this. You could either develop your own curriculum and become registered yourself as a training provider. Now there are going to be some things that come along with that, some requirements that come along with that, including record keeping requirements. You're going to have to make reports to the training provider registry about completions and stuff like that. So that's something to keep in mind. But another way you could handle it, if you're a carrier that wants to offer this to your drivers, is you could source the training from a third party training provider, and you could either the interesting thing about the way that the rule is set up is that it says that the training either has to be developed by or delivered by somebody who meets the minimum instructor requirements. And we're going to talk about what those are in a second, but that gives you some leeway to either if you're just delivering the training, you don't have to necessarily be listed on the training provider registry as long as you sourced it from somebody who is. In other words, as long as the person that developed the training for you is listed on the training provider registry and has certified that they had qualified instructors develop it. So, endless amount of ways that you could structure this if you want to roll it out yourself, including partnering with an online training provider. So,
And really, I mean, this is great for motor carriers, and this is also really great for those that run trucking schools, because if I'm paying someone a warm body to deliver this information in a trucking school, and I have the chance now to have an online training pumped in with questions already there, and compliant with the program, I mean, that's great news for me.
yeah, for sure. So, again, as we're going through these questions, feel free to, if you have any more specific questions about any of the topics we're discussing, throw them in the comments, and we'll try and get to them as they come in. Next question then is, what's the process going to look like? How once a driver is determined to complete one of those CDL transactions that we mentioned, what's that process look like? And there's a few different steps. So first of all, that driver is going to have to seek out an entry-level driver training provider that's listed on the training provider registry. So they're going to have to search on the training provider registry to find one. Now, if they are employed by a motor carrier, like we just talked about, that's offering that to them, then obviously they've already found their training provider. It's their employer. But the important point there is that the training provider needs to be listed on the national registry.
But I would say, if you're a driver and you're being sold this bill of goods, you should probably check the training provider registry before you.
You may
actually
want to
take the
check that
training.
out, because here's what's going to happen. If that entity is not really listed on the training provider registry and you go through their training and now they haven't uploaded your certificate because they're not on the registry, and you go to your license branch and say, okay, I'm ready to take the skills test, the license branch is going to search the training provider registry for your certificate. And if it's not there, you're not going to be eligible to complete that CDL transaction. So that's essentially the process. Driver seeks out a training provider on the registry, completes the training to the satisfaction of the training provider. The training provider then uploads the certificate of completion to the training provider registry, and then it's available then for the state driver's licensing agencies to review when they have a student in front of them that's trying to complete a CDL transaction. They will reference the registry to make sure that there's a certificate there, or multiple certificates. If they've gotten their theory component and their behind the wheel component from separate training providers, there's going to be two certificates. There's going to be a theory certificate and there's going to be a behind the wheel certificate. The licensing agency is going to have to make sure both of those are present in order to allow that driver to complete the CDL transaction.
Yeah, it looks like we just got a question in from Mark Gardner, and he asked, if I'm allowed to use online for theory, isn't it possible for me to eliminate any and all classroom delivery? And I'll weigh in, and Brandon, you can weigh in as well. That's absolutely right. I mean, as it stands now, there is no requirement. Like Brandon said, you can learn to drive a truck from your brother, And as long as you study well enough to pass the CDL exam and the behind the wheel component, demonstrate your skills, there's no classroom requirement at this point. And really, if you take the theory online, there's going to be no online or no classroom requirement going forward.
Yeah, and even if it's not just a one-off person, if you're a carrier that says we're going to partner with an online training provider to allow all of our employees to take the online training, you could have your employees, if you wanted to, take that training at their homes. The important part is that each of the students passes the training to the satisfaction of the training provider. So in that case, it's going to be an online training provider. The online training provider is going to do online assessment. There's going to be an online quiz that they take, and then assuming the driver passes that, that could all be done outside the classroom. And then after they complete that and there's a certificate, then they would go on to take their behind the wheel training if they hadn't already taken that. So,
Yep, that's a great question, Mark.
all right. So, next question then is, what role will carriers play in this process? We kind of already answered this, and the answer is they will have no obligations under the rule unless they're wishing to provide the training to their drivers themselves. So, all right. So here we talked about that the fact that the training has to be developed or delivered by somebody who qualifies as a qualified instructor under the rule. So what exactly does that mean? Who qualifies as an instructor?
Yeah, so qualified instructors, they're going to have to be someone that holds a valid CDL and has for the last 2 years. Um,
Sorry, technical difficulties here.
And they have to be familiar with the types of CMVs for which the training is provided. And like I said, they need to be sufficiently experienced to be a behind the wheel instructor, meaning 2 years of CDL experience and an active CDL. And if you are um, putting someone behind the wheel to do this training, this behind the wheel training, you have to store those credentials and make sure that they are indeed qualified.
So actually, I'll make one caveat to that. So you said active CDL, so that's true. Obviously, if they're going to be out on the road doing assessments with them and they're operating on public roadways, they would obviously have to have a valid CDL. But the rule actually does make some exceptions to that and says that if you are an instructor who has held a CDL within the last 2 years and you don't have a current one, you can still qualify as an instructor so long as your CDL wasn't disqualified for some disqualifying reason, like a serious safety violation or drug and alcohol violation or anything like that. If you've just let it lapse, for example, but you've held one of the same or higher class to operate the types of commercial vehicles for which you are providing training, then you could be eligible to be an instructor. But again, obviously, if you're operating on public roads, you got to have a valid one.
And that's the assumption I was operating on, that they're actually demonstrating skills on public roads. If you have access to a private yard, you have that luxury, then yeah, absolutely, no CDL required.
Yeah, the other thing to keep in mind is, aside from having the same or higher class CDL, you also, if you are training on those particular endorsements we mentioned, hazmat, passenger, school bus, you also have to have currently those endorsements or have had those endorsements in the past in order to be qualified to instruct on those particular topics. So I'm going to try and get back here since I screwed things up here with our slides. Okay, so here's an important one that we kind of hit on earlier, and it's a question we get quite a bit of, and it's, what about state requirements? And this is the one where we were talking about drivers who are domiciled in states that have their own minimum requirements. The most common one is going to be a minimum hours requirement, must still comply with those requirements, even if they obtain the training from an out-of-state provider. So I think that's going to start to get a little tricky, especially with online training. If you're a driver who needs to obtain training and you're interested in online training, you got to be sure you're checking with your state to see if they have any minimum requirements. Because the interesting thing about the rule for online training providers is it says that online training providers don't have to meet any state qualifications. So the online training providers can still be listed on the registry without certifying that they've met all 50 states requirements. So you're probably going to have online training providers who have more relaxed requirements than some states that are out there. So an online training provider may have a course. I'm just making this up. That's 8 hours long, a theory-based course that's 8 hours long. You may live in a state that says, in order to get a Class A CDL, you got to have a minimum of 12 hours of theory-based training. That online training provider is not going to work for your situation. And then when you try and go complete your CDL transaction at your particular state, your state's going to call you out on that and say, we need evidence that that particular training provider met our minimum hours requirement, and you're not going to be able to provide it. So, long story short, you need to do some due diligence before you select a training provider.
And really importantly, I mean, if you're looking at a driver that has a CLP, you need to know where that driver's domiciled, what state that CLP is in, and where they're actually going to be getting their CDL, and understand what those requirements are. Because when they actually have to go take the theory-based component, if there's an hours requirement, meaning if you're a California carrier hiring a Nevada domiciled driver and he's going to be getting a CDL from Nevada, I mean, you need to understand if your theory-based training that you're going to be putting in front of that driver is going to satisfy Nevada's requirements. So just keep an eye on those types of things.
So Mark has another question here, and it's a good one. It's one I thought about, but I don't think FMCSA has answered directly. So he says, written test, can it be one simple question to make it easy for the driver to pass? They don't seem to specify what needs to be on the test. Yeah, that's potentially a gap in the FMCSA's regulations and their frequently asked questions. So certainly the FMCSA has a curriculum that has to be followed, a very detailed curriculum that's I think it's in Appendix A to Part 380 if you want to search it out, that goes through each of the various topics that have to be taught in order for a driver to be assessed in the theory-based portion. And those different topics are different depending on whether it's Class A class or a Class B or the hazmat endorsement, et cetera. So clearly, I think what FMCSA has in mind is that any assessment that's done by that particular theory-based training provider is going to kind of track those same topics, right? So FMCSA is for sure expecting that, and they have audit rights. So in the rule, it says that if you're going to be listed on the training provider registry, you're opening yourself up to potential audits by the FMCSA. If they don't like what it is that you're offering, they can take steps to remove you from the training provider registry. So I suspect that if there are going to be training providers who try that trick and try and make it easy, too easy for their drivers to pass the test, FMCSA will probably yank them.
That would make it pretty simple if you got 0% or 100%, right? So
50-50 shot.
yeah, I was going to say, I mean, that kind of goes to something I was thinking about is, if you're a driver, you should really be concerned about what you're getting with this theory-based training. I mean, because simply checking the boxes and providing a short training that doesn't really prepare you any better for actually being a driver or actually passing your CDL exam. I mean, you should get a demo potentially, especially if you're a motor carrier that's going to be purchasing theory-based training for drivers that you're bringing in. I mean, you should understand what the training looks like, get a demo, make sure that it's not just checking the boxes, that you're actually getting good content.
All right, so next question is, if we are just playing pre-made training, do we have to qualify as instructors? We kind of hit on this a little bit. So this is the example where, let's say you're a motor carrier or you're a CDL school that doesn't want to be on the training provider registry yourself. You want to play pre-made videos that you've purchased from a training provider. If I'm just having somebody literally press play on the video and then all of my students are watching it, do I have to have somebody who qualifies as an instructor press the play button? Obviously, the answer is no. FMCSA guidance says that the training must either be developed by or delivered by a qualified instructor. So somebody in that train has to be a qualified instructor. If it's not you who's pushing the play button and walking your drivers through it, then it has to be whoever you sourced the training from. It has to be whoever developed that particular training. So if you're in that position, or if you're thinking about offering that either to your students, if you're a CDL school, or to your employees, then our advice to you is that you need to make sure that the entity that you source that training from, number one, is on the training provider registry if you're not going to be, and number two, that they used a qualified instructor to develop that training. So I don't think it's an unreasonable request for carriers or CDL schools in that instance to ask their training provider to provide evidence of the fact that the instructor meets the qualification requirements, which should be easy for them to provide. It should literally be a copy of the CDL of whoever whoever developed the training.
And thank God we got a little common sense here that you don't have to be a qualified instructor to press play and play this online theory-based training for your students.
Yeah, for sure. Um, all right, so this one we kind of already addressed as well, but it's the question is if a driver holds a commercial learner's permit prior to February 7th, must he or she take the entry level driver training? And this must have been a common question FMCSA was getting as well because they have a specific frequently asked question on this particular topic, and it says that no, as long as that particular driver held the CLP prior to February 7th and that they don't have to renew it after February 7th, then they're not going to have to take the entry level driver training. They could go and complete their CDL transaction without going through that entry level driver training process. So that's the good news if you're in that boat.
More common sense. What's going on here?
Exactly. Well, Jerad, that kind of wraps up all of our pre-made questions. So again, if you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments and we'll answer them. If not, we will wrap up here. We'll wait a couple more minutes here, maybe as we're kind of going through some other things to wrap things up. Jerad, you want to talk about maybe what some different things that we have in store coming up for Trucksafe Live and at Trucksafe?
Yeah, we've got some interesting things going on. We've got some new topics that we're developing. I mean, we've got some new guests that we're trying to pull in. Should be engaging shows. So if you have show ideas, absolutely post a comment here so we can see some show ideas, or send us an email, give us a call. Let us know if you have show ideas, things that you'd really like to hear us talk about. But again, we've got some exciting topics coming up, and we're staying busy with Trucksafe Consulting and Childress Law. So good things in the future.
Yeah, for sure. Mark's asking, can he get a recording of this? This is a live show. It's going to live on forever on our various social media channels. So if you're watching on YouTube, looks like you are, Mark. It's going to be available at the same link that you found it, so you can watch it there. It's also going to be on our website at trucksafelive.com. If you go there, you'll be able to find it. LP Safety Group is asking, where can I, as a driver, find a provider? This is going to be the Training Provider Registry. If you just search on Google for FMCSA Training Provider Registry, it'll pop right up, and that's where they will have the list of all of the registered training providers, and you can see if the one that you want to use is on that list, or if you want to search by location, somebody near you, you can do that as well.
It's kind of hard to get to the actual list itself, but you should be able to download an Excel file and be able to search that and sort it. So
it's a little strange how that is now. I suspect that once the rule goes into effect, I'm hoping it'll be more user friendly and you won't have to download a spreadsheet and then manually search through that. It would be nice if, because this is kind of akin to the medical examiner registry that they have for medical examiners, where you can go on the FMCSA's website, look at the medical examiner registry, and you could search by location for a particular medical examiner. I'm hoping they'll have something similar for training
or a
providers.
lot like the ELD self-certified list of approved ELD vendors, and they'll actually show the revoked ELD vendors as well.
So we'll have to wait and see if that comes to fruition. If not, like Jerad said, it's kind of hard to find, but it's on the Training Provider Registry website. You got to download the list. You can sort it by things like what type of training are they providing? Is it online only? Is it per location? Where are the locations? That type of stuff. So
Brandon's going to write a letter to the FMCSA requesting a more concise listing of the training provider registry.
Well, with all of the IT issues that they had, this probably isn't high priority for them. But George says, thanks for the timely information. No worries. It's definitely timely. It's probably a little late, frankly, but it is what it is. If you're a motor carrier, like a lot of our clients are, good news is here, there's not a lot to worry about unless you're providing the training yourself. So one other thing, we were kind of talking about what we've got going on at Trucksafe, a couple of things that we're excited to be launching here shortly. Number one, if you haven't already checked out our Trucksafe Academy, it's trucksafeacademy.com. We already have up there a lot of great training resources for motor carriers and safety managers and drivers. And we've had those available now for about a year or so. And check those out, trucksafeacademy.com. our safety manager course is great for anybody in a position that's managing drivers or even third parties that deal with driver issues, driver compliance issues. It goes through the full gamut of the federal safety regulations and breaks them down into their basic components so that you can get a very high level working knowledge of the safety regulations. So things like driver qualification, hours of service, vehicle maintenance, drug and alcohol testing, all of those key topics that the FMCSA expects motor carriers and their drivers to know is kind of captured in the safety manager course. Our driver course is great for onboarding drivers who you want to be knowledgeable of the safety regulations and comply with those regulations, and also as a remedial training type tool to kind of have living out there. If you have drivers who are having issues with hours of service, you can reassign them to our hours of service course. So check those out. But all of that is kind of a setup for what's to come. So first up, we've got a new hazmat course that we're working on developing now. This is going to be, we think, a great offer to motor carriers whose drivers haul hazmat. This is training that's gonna satisfy the mandatory training requirement for hazmat employees. Anybody who's involved in the transportation of hazmat or preparing shipping papers, that type of thing, they have to get mandatory training within the first 90 days of when they start in that position, and then every 3 years thereafter. And so this is going to be online based training developed and delivered by a hazmat expert, hazmat compliance expert, and we're going to have that available on Trucksafe Academy as well here shortly, hopefully this month, if not then early next month. And then lastly, what we are also working on, as Jerad said, we've been pretty busy. We are developing our own entry-level driver training, theory-based training that's going to be offered online. So if you are a driver that's looking for an online theory-based option to take your training, or if you're a motor carrier or a CDL school that's looking to roll out a prepackaged online theory-based training, we're going to be able to offer that. It's going to include detailed video-based lessons. It's also going to include the required assessment. It's going to make the required reporting to FMCSA, the certificates once the students complete their training. And so we are planning to be listed on the training provider registry. So
Yeah, that's exciting. And I mean, just like with the hazmat, I mean, we don't pretend that we're the experts in hazmat. So we don't pretend like we're the experts in actually driving a truck, and we don't have CDLs. So we found an expert that's actually going to do that for us. So we're very excited about that.
yeah, so we just wanted to roll a quick video that we put together on that upcoming training that we're going to offer.
Operating large commercial motor vehicles on public highways takes skill, and it can be dangerous without the proper training and know-how. Recent changes to federal DOT regulations require those seeking to obtain or upgrade certain commercial driver's licenses or endorsements to successfully complete standardized entry-level driver training from a registered training provider before completing their CDL transactions with their local license branch. Obtaining this training doesn't have to be overcomplicated or costly. Building on its existing library of cutting-edge DOT compliance training, Trucksafe Academy will soon offer an easy-to-use online platform for drivers to obtain the required theory-based entry-level driver training for Class A and Class B CDLs, as well as hazmat endorsements. Hassle-free, no-nonsense, dynamic training. Taken at your own pace, on your own time, and on your own device. Learn precisely what you need to know from experienced instructors in order to complete your CDL transaction and operate safely. Check out our full course offerings and sample lessons online at trucksafeacademy.com.
All right, thanks for indulging us for that self-promotion there. Last thing I'll mention before we kind of wrap things up here is, as we mentioned at the start, we're both transportation attorneys. We both co-own Trucksafe, but we also co-own Childress Law. So if you, and we do DOT compliance specific legal work for our clients. So if you have any need for that, be sure to check us out at childresslawpllc.com. Thanks again to the sponsor of this show, Links. We really appreciate their involvement with us. Go check them out on their website if you need that type of service. Jerad, you want to wrap things up here?
Yeah, one additional training offering that slipped Brandon's mind, I think, was reasonable suspicion training for supervisors. So if you have a need to train those supervisors that are actually supervising drivers on a daily basis, I mean, you're required to do that. We offer a reasonable suspicion course. Check that out. Thanks everyone for listening, and have a great day,
Yeah,
everybody.
we'll see you later.